Okay, it's 9 o'clock. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the festival. Very excited for second day. This first hour we'll have 2 talks, which will be very interesting. We'll have David Jarman from Edinburgh Napier University, who's going to give us a talk called Shared Space, Classroom and Canvas. And after that, we'll have Dr. Catherine Porter and Dr. Catherine Collins from University of Manchester giving a talk called Active Learning in Eye Anatomy. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping first, and then we'll get right into it. I should say the sessions are being recorded. If you don't want to appear on the recording, please turn off your camera. I'll make sure right now that non-video participants are hidden. So just turn off your camera and you won't appear on the recording. Other things I should mention is I'm going to put a link to the festival Padlet in the chat right now. This is where presenters and anybody else for that matter can share any resources. So you might find slides there and anything else you might want from these sessions. We've got 20 minutes for each talk. Please, there might be some interaction, in which case do interact, type away in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. The presenters might do as well. But also after each talk, we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes to have some questions and discussions. So please save your questions and discussions until the end, if you could, please. I think that's all I need to say. David, can I hand over to you to start your presentation?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Flo. Very much appreciated. I'll start my stopwatch. I'll try and keep within the 20 minutes. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about some of my work and what I've been doing in the past 18 months or so to try and provide my students with a shared experience in terms of classroom work, both sharing and collaborating within the classroom, but also layering on top of that an online and digital kind of shared experience and space as well. Some of this will perhaps become a little bit clearer as I start to share some materials, but I wanted to set a bit of context for the first couple of minutes. I'm sure you will remember that in very short order, we switched to an online model of teaching when COVID lockdowns kind of affected just about everybody in the sector in all those different ways. And very quickly, we and the students, I felt, became familiar with and confident with a online and digital way of teaching and learning. And as we started to come out of those lockdown periods, I was thinking to myself that a lot of that would get lost unless I took some steps to try and say, okay, well, maybe I can now, be a better or more diverse, more ambitious lecturer as a result of kind of the new tools and the new kind of baseline that we had all kind of risen to in terms of familiarity with different tools. So I was looking around for different ways to make use of some of that material and some of those ways of working, but it took me a couple of years to come up with a platform or a model that I think works for me. And this came to me when I was in a meeting where someone was using an online digital Canvas tool to gather material. We were in the class together. We were in the classroom having this kind of staff meeting, but they were saying we're also going to use our devices to contribute material in the same way that we might write on a post-it note and stick it on the wall. We're going to use an online shared canvas, and it kind of struck me that this had the potential to be used in a classroom setting as well. And so what I've been doing for the past 18 months is trying to work out different ways of using both this kind of active learning, sitting around a table, doing different tasks as a kind of group for my students, at the same time as having some of the collaborative work also take place in an online Canvas format. I think that what I was looking for to give me extra confidence that I could do some of this more active and more of this digital stuff was a structure, a format within which I could then kind of reuse the format, reuse the structure each week, refine it, fair enough, but ultimately then be able to kind of bring on top of that different tools. So what I'm going to do is start sharing some materials for the next few minutes. I'm then going to try, fingers crossed, and give us all a chance to do some of that collaborative work. I'm going to see how many people we've got, 36 people. So I think that might be enough to kind of make it work, but we will just see how we go. First things first, let me show you some of my material. And we'll go with that one there. And hopefully that's all coming through fair enough, all fine. So what I've called this session is Shared Space, Classroom and Canvas. What you can hopefully see on the screen there in front of you are a couple of examples of how I've been using this material. On the left is a kind of first attempt using a platform called Miro, and on the right is something that I'm doing at the moment using Padlet's sandbox feature. And I'll have a look at these in more detail when we get into it, but essentially I'm using different tools from one module to the next, but the kind of environment is kind of working and I'm finding ways of kind of making it happen. First things first, however, I'm going to switch our attention to a new development in Edinburgh Napier over the past academic session. This is a room that has become available to us on the Craiglocker campus where I work. They took two existing classrooms, which were fairly standard, capacity of about 20 to 30 student classrooms, 4 rows of desks and a big screen at the front. And they took down the wall in between them. And then they've done a lot of work to turn this space into an active learning classroom for us, where we can do a lot of different things. So, for example, there are 2 big screens at the front, one of which is a touchscreen. And around the rest of the room, there are 6 more screens. And those 6 screens allow students to stream their device onto that local screen so they can have that kind of shared experience as a group. The lecturer at the front has control over how those different screens can interact with each other. So, for example, if a student group in one corner of the room was doing some really good work and they wanted to share that with the rest of the class, then it can get bounced to one of the big screens at the front, or both of them, and from there it can then get bounced to all of the screens around the room. So we've got that kind of technological base to the active learning classroom in Napier. What we've also got, as you can see, are some very flexible bits of furniture that can move around. The students like the chairs; they're the best on campus, really, in classroom settings. We've also got a quiet area in one corner where some more secluded work can be done. And that can either be for an individual person, or it could be a very kind of small group conversation. 2 or 3 people could do that sort of thing. There's also some nice innovations in terms of the sound dampening. The lighting is more sophisticated than the strip lights that we tend to have on the rest of the campus. We've also got care has been taken over the colors of the walls and the ceiling and that sort of thing. There's also a little bit of biophilia. They're not real plants, they're plastic plants, but they look like real plants. So it gives that kind of extra dimension to what we've got. So it's a nice space to be in. And I think although we're not going to see all of our classrooms converted into this format, we are learning lessons in terms of how we might be able to kind of adapt and implement some of these ideas. As you can see, when using Lego and other bits and pieces, you don't have to use the screens. We can kind of get students doing lots of different things in lots of different ways. I found myself becoming more confident in the room as time has gone by. I might start with the students in one area of the room and then they disperse into smaller groups and kind of make it work in those different ways. It's been really interesting, I think, seeing how other colleagues of mine have used the space in different ways, how they've been able to do different types of assessments, different types of teaching, and so on. Okay, all good. So that's the kind of shared classroom, time, space. Now, when it comes to the shared digital dimension to it, this is the first version that I was working with. I was using a platform called Miro. You might be familiar with it. It was used within a meeting, as I say. And what I did was set up one of these, using its infinite canvas capabilities, you can go into huge amounts of detail. You can have an awful lot of stuff on the same Miro board. So what I was doing, as you can see over here on the left, is to pull together multiple different weeks worth of seminars into the same space, the same digital space. And the way it would work, as we can see in some of these examples here, is that, for example, on the left, topic 1 was a particular discussion for student groups around the ways in which different types of cities are using festivals and events in strategic ways. So I teach festivals and events within the tourism and hospitality section at Edinburgh Napier. And here I had a space where students could sit around a table with their devices, Some of them were using ones borrowed from the library, and they could use that shared Miro space to then contribute their thoughts in the same way that we might see post-it notes, for example, if it was a wholly analog experience. So the students are collaborating on these different tasks. Sometimes it's just sticky notes. As we got more confident and capable, moving from left to right in those examples, the students started using images and links, and they were kind of building up more of a rich mix of materials that was all going towards this kind of shared piece of work, should we say. Now, ultimately, what this meant was that when we all walk out of the classroom, we keep this as a digital archive of our work. The students can always go back to this as a platform. They can see how they are contributing to the same thing week by week by week. So I think that that has a kind of a uh, a value in the sense that the students see how their work is always accessible to them in that particular way. It was collaborative at the time, both in person and online, but it's still available to them as time goes by. I think what it also meant was that you could imagine in a classroom setting, the students spend, let's say, 20 minutes working on a shared task, responding to a particular question. And then when it comes to sharing that work at the end of a class, as we often do for that reflective period of time, we don't rely on people saying, oh, well, I've got it on this memory stick, and can I just log into my email, or can I email? None of that kind of has to happen if they've been working, if they've been doing digital work together, because it's all there. They've all got access to everybody's work anyway, so we can just drag ourselves around and so on. And on the far right, that was a piece of work around placemaking and events and festivals, their role in giving people a kind of place-based identity. So we used the Lego and we took pictures of it, and then the pictures are what went up online. So that was the way that that has been working. Just to say, on this first iteration, this was something else that I did in the middle of the shared online space. I had a little bit of instructions on how to use this board. I had extra materials there in terms of how each week's activities were relating to the learning outcomes, to the assessments, to the following week, the previous week. That sort of thing was all being brought together, how to use this board. It doesn't really matter how small the text when you're actually using the board, because you can just zoom in and in and in and in. That's the kind of one of the beauties of Miro. I should say this was always a resource that is running parallel to and complementing our standard VLE. We use Moodle, and Moodle is still there. Moodle is still where I'm posting links and updates and files and all those sorts of things, Turnitin links. So this was very much about in real life, in kind of real time. This was the kind of a complementary shared space. Now, this is version 1. Version 3, where I am now, is using Padlet's sandbox feature. Yes, there was a version 2. Version 2 was using Figma. Now, Figma is very similar to Miro in different ways in my experience, and my institution prefers Figma over Miro for certain things, fine. But I was finding it very difficult to get the students to be able to sign up to Figma through their education package. So I said, that's great, thanks very much, I'll move on. Padlet relatively recently has introduced a sandbox feature, which has many of the same opportunities. And I'm using sandbox to present this set of slides, should we say. Within the sandbox world, they're called cards. So this is a card. This is card number 5. You might be able to see down the left-hand side, we've got all the different cards that I'm using. So on the one hand, it has a sort of PowerPoint or Keynote style format, if you want to take that approach. On the far right, we've got this little palette of different tools that are available to you. You can draw, you can add text boxes, you can add shapes. If we click on this +17, then there's a whole load of other things that you can do if you wish. And as I've been using it, that number has slowly crept up as they introduce more new things that you can do using Padlet's sandbox. So on the left-hand side, relatively early on in the term, students were being, no, what was this one? On the left, we're looking at the links between festivals and community. So how does a festival represent aspects of a community? On the right-hand side, similar kind of conversation. You can see different student groups in their shared classroom active learning space have approached the task in different ways. On the left-hand side, it's mainly about text. I'm glad to say that recently Sandbox has introduced a wider range of typefaces you can use, so it's not all in this almost Comic Sans. There's now a different, you can use other typefaces. On the right-hand side, we can see that some students were trying new things. If they're using a iPad, for example, and they've got an Apple Pencil, then they can just write on the Padlet's the Sandbox space, and that's all good. They can bring in GIFs and animations and all that kind of thing. So yes, there's plenty of opportunity there for students to use this work in different ways. So just to show you a little bit more of what we've been doing recently. How am I doing for time? 14 minutes, no worries. This here is an experience that the students had where we're using what was called the PAIR framework, PAIR, to think about the opportunities to use artificial intelligence, generative AI, within an academic setting. What's the problem that you're trying to create? What's your AI tool of choice? How are you interacting with that tool? And then how are you reflecting on it later? So trying to emphasize that reflective dimension. And in this particular one here on the left, we've got some students showing the results of the prompts that they put in. On the right-hand side, we've got a piece of work where students in 1 week were trying to design a festival and linking it to a particular place, and that's fine. And then in a later week, they came back to the same ideas, and they used some generative AI to create posters and other artifacts in relation to what was essentially the same project. So yes, within the context of Padlet's Sandbox, students are able to use different tools in different ways. They're working together and so on. Now, I want to give you the chance to use some Padlet Sandbox stuff. But before we get there, I just want to give a couple more reflections in case I run out of time. Over the period of working with these materials and these platforms, I have found that my seminar tasks have become more focused. They've become less complex, and I'm hoping that that gives the students more flexibility to then interpret them as they wish. It's not once upon a time, I might have given the students 10 different questions and said, right, pick 2 or 3 of these and really go to town on doing it. And that would have been one way of trying to approach that. But now I'm essentially saying to the class, right, you've got one task. And I want to see how each of your student groups then attacks that task and how you kind of pull it together. I think I have found a nice model where I can pull together different tasks and I can apply this structure, this format to different themes and different topics. So I think that that's kind of working well. Often student engagement is better. You might imagine that over the past couple of academic terms, when students have walked into this new classroom, then that kind of lights up their eyes a little bit, and then we start using this kind of digital canvas as well. So that has kind of been nice to see students have engaged with that relatively quickly at the beginning of a term. It's not a golden bullet in terms of maintaining attendance. I have to say my attendance has, not been great as term has gone by, as we've got closer to assessments, whatever it might be. I like that these new tools are available. I have had colleagues saying in a general kind of active learning conversation, but we've always been doing this. This is what I've always done. And I think that's fair enough. But it is now kind of something that the university, the institution is now investing in. Okay. Right, I've got 3 minutes left. Let's see how this works. I would love it if we could give this a try. What I'm going to do is drop into the chat if I can. Oh, I don't know if I can. I don't have access to the chat. So what I'm going to do is
I can put things in the chat.
I think actually time is brief. I don't see how I can access the chat when I'm sharing my screen in this way. So I'm going to pass on that bit. But just to say that all that should be necessary to kind of engage people in different ways is to give them the link. Within my institution, students have already got kind of basically a Padlet login as built into their kind of university login. What I was going to ask you to do was to go onto one of these shared spaces. You could choose which of the 4 to go for, and because I realized there would be a lot of people in the same space otherwise, and then just kind of give you the chance to add some material. I'm not going to do that because time is very brief. However, This is ultimately where I am with my work. I'm happy that this is working nicely for me. I think that it is giving me the kind of experiences and feedback from students that that at the moment is working, and their module survey responses are positive as well. So what I'm going to do there is bring things to a close with 90 seconds to spare. Yes, I will hand you back to Flo. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. We do have a few minutes, so if you want to put the Padlet in the chat now, so we can have a look.
Okay, we're up to 44 people. Right, there you go. That should give you access to it if people want to go in and have a look.
Perfect. And while people have a look, there were a few questions in the chat. The first one was Victoria, who said, when you're using tech in the classrooms, what's the tech you're using in the classes to share screens, please? Was the question.
Well, a lot of the so when a student sits down at a desk next to one of those screens that are around the room, on the screen it will say, here are some instructions using iOS/Mac stuff, and here are some instructions if you're using Windows, and here's some more if you're using Android. So they can share locally to that machine that they've got to hand. So it's using the Wi-Fi in the room to be able to do a lot of that. Then at the front, the lecturer, as it were, has a lectern, which is not in the middle of the room, it's off in a corner, but essentially one of the three screens that's in front of the lecturer there is where they can, using touch, just drag from a representation of one of the side screens into one of the front monitors, and that will kind of take their local student screen and replicate it on one of the front ones. And once it's on one of the front ones, then you can share it to all the other ones. So a lot of it is using a touch screen at the front. There's also a built-in PC to the lectern at the front, which will then allow you to do kind of presentations and so on. And then you can plug in using HDMI or USB-C. So yeah, there's quite a lot that's gone in to making that work for us.
That's very good. There was another question by Vicky about if there's anything you do to make sure that students aren't deleting anything on the Miro after.
Yes, I quickly appreciated that, as far as I could see, there wasn't really any way of making this work successfully unless everybody had the same editing rights. And so there are aspects to Miro, for example, that will allow me to lock down all the bits that we're not using. But it doesn't take much for anybody to unlock it and then off we go. So what I was doing both for Miro and the stuff I'm doing now with Sandbox is just duplicating. So I'm doing whatever I want to do to set up the next class, and then I duplicate the whole thing and I tuck it away in a folder using Sandbox's dashboard and all of that. I should say that with the Sandbox approach, as you could probably tell, I haven't got one canvas to rule them all, so to speak. I've got each different week, each different topic has its own Sandbox file. So it's about saying, right, I'm just going to duplicate what I set up here, put it away. We'll use this as the working copy, and then that's fine. It's an important thing to consider. Yeah.
Thank you. There was another question. I think Isabel mentioned. Yeah, I found that some students find Miro too busy. I've struggled with students who are neurodiverse or in bigger groups. Have you found that as well?
I think that may well have been experienced by some without me necessarily engaging with it as much as perhaps I should have done. However, in my defense, perhaps, each time I've used one of these tools, I've said quite openly to the students, this is the first time I'm using this, or this is experimental. This is about hopefully us all contributing to seeing what it can do and pushing its boundaries. Some of the stuff that they've been doing with Sandbox in particular, I had no idea was possible. And so I think that by trying to engage the students at that kind of a level of saying I'm, as it were, as familiar with some of this as you are, and you will very quickly become kind of confident, hopefully, as a result of using it, is hopefully giving people a chance to go at different paces of me being able to say, I really like the way this is going, but that doesn't detract from other more, I don't know what the word would be, less ambitious, perhaps, applications of some of these tools. There have been some other limitations. I've had students from time to time saying, let's not be over reliant on the digital canvas, or I don't like being in a situation where we get kind of freeloaders where actually it's only 2 or 3 people doing the work. That kind of thing can happen. And I think that this is a learning process for me. Different ways in which I could perhaps remedy that might be mixing up the groups, or having smaller groups, or wanting to be much clearer about what each person was contributing to what's going on there. But it's hard to be sure.
Thank you so much. All right, we have one last question in the chat before we move to the next talk, which is Louise asks, how do you provide links to these sandbox cards to the relevant Moodle page to enable students to get back to the content for revision reflection?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So within Sandbox, you have the, I'm just saying that there are 5 unapproved objects. So I'm going to approve all the, see, I'm still getting used to the tools here. I think people have been adding bits and pieces, and right. So for each weekly topic in Moodle, I have a separate section. So, you click the drop down, it opens up, and there's a standard sort of header text, and the header text will say this week's topic, a couple of sentences. Here is the link to this week's sandbox space. Here is a link to the, I don't know, the Panopto recordings folder where you'll find everything for the whole module. And here is a link to the key reading for this week. And then we get into the business of here are some files for whatever it might be, lecture slides, PDFs, and so on. So each week the students are going initially to Moodle, I would imagine, and they're clicking on the Sandbox link, which is then taking them to a different tab in their web browser, and off we go. That seems to be working out okay. I think that an alternative way of doing it might be to try and provide a single link to a folder, and the folder or the tab maybe would have all of the different Sandbox spaces so that they could see them all. But I think that this has worked so far, and it's what I'll go with. An alternative might be to start putting QR codes up on the screens in front at the beginning of a class, but then students are using so many different devices, and not all will have the same capabilities.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's a very lovely presentation. I see lots of people are both active in the chat, but also on your Padlet. So I'm sure people will keep typing away at it. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.